Hash House and Circle Up.
Welcome to On, the Hash House Harrier podcast for interviews, history, and stories. I'm your host, Ra. Today on the podcast, we're back again on the left coast of America with a longtime hasher, been all around the world. It's a pretty interesting hashing resume, all 7 continents, which I really want to find out about because I just finished 7 continents, and he's hashed on a place that when we went to, it was a blizzard snowstorm. So we're going to find out about all this stuff from Wild Bill. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Let's tell people your hashing origin story. It was 1984, but when, where, and how did you get to your first hash?
I was working for Hughes Aircraft Company, and I was sent over to put in a radar system in Malaysia. And I was based at Butterworth Air Base, and I was living on the island of Penang. And I'm a runner. So one of the things I wanted to do was meet with local people and interface with them and run a bit. I asked my secretary, who's a native Malaysian, about that. I said, "Do you know of a running group?" And she goes, "I know of a running group," because she didn't know me very well. And she goes, "But it's really not for everybody." And I said, "Tell me about it." She goes, "You're just going to have to check it out." So I had been touring the island of Penang. I would go up places like the reservoir and stuff like that. And there were a lot of walking trails, but they went up into the jungle. Of course, I was brand new to everything, and I was reluctant to go up there. So when I drove out to my first hash, they were just leaving at the time I got there, and they were running right up those jungle paths that I was staring at and had been afraid to go up myself. They were not only doing it, they were doing it with great enthusiasm. So I was immediately hooked, and I followed them around to the end, and we had a few beers and introduced myself, and I never looked back. I joined right away, and I stayed with them for the 2 years I was there. And when I came back home, some of the Australians that had been there came to the US and looked me up and wanted to run with a hash. So that linked me up to the Long Beach Hash House Harriers here in California. And it goes on. That's where I met Alouette, who became my wife 4 years later. And we subsequently hashed all over the world.
Let's review back in Penang. Penang's a co-ed hash. So that person in your office, did she go on the trail?
She did not that day. I had to just show up stag and introduce myself. And yeah, the Hash House Harrier women ran on Thursday nights, and the Penang Hash guys ran on Monday nights. It was an all men's hash, but the women's hash was definitely co-ed. Everybody was welcome.
And did you run with both groups?
Yes, I did. The men were more adventurous and stuff like that, but I wanted to meet people and the locals and stuff like that. I didn't interface much with the Malaysian Air Force other than at work because they all lived on the mainland and I lived over on the island. I might also add that I was given hardship pay for living on Penang Island, which was a paradise resort. So, folks, yeah, it was awesome in that regard. I made a lot of friends there. The Australians were also part of the defense pact at the time. So there was a large Australian contingent who had basically, the Aussies had been there since World War II. So they had the recreational aspect down pat. They had stuff going all the time. And we took bus trips up to other hashes, up to Songkla and up to Thailand, up to Hajai and stuff like that. We went all over, but they had stuff going on all the time. I immediately became part of the local scene. I did not just stay in my hotels.
Nice. What was the difference between the 2 groups? Besides being all men and like women co-ed, what was the traditions and how they ran and how they did circle or singing or on afters?
They were pretty similar. Yeah, they really were. Yes, and they did sing. These were things I was used to a running group that was not a hash group. And instead of just running and looking at your watch and going around a track, we were running through the jungle with bugles and playing tricks on each other, the false trails and this and that. Then we'd get done. And then the party started. We'd have a few beers before and after. The men did not drink before. They were drinking ginger beer. And the rule was that you had to run the run or you didn't get any beer at all. Because some of these guys would never leave the beer truck if that was the case. We did that. And then we usually went out to eat after that, which is a wonderful experience in Penang because they had these outdoor food courts where you could just wander around and get a thing of noodles and get some shark's fin soup or this and that and this and that. Then the evening just rolled by. It was just a wonderful way to socialize.
Yeah, that sounds a classic hashing. What about people who were there when you started and all your subsequent traveling and events all over the world? Are there people from then that you have seen through the years that were still hashing?
Yes, one jumps out at me right away because he continued to travel internationally. He was just a local guy named Sammy Raja, and his hash name was Mr. Cool. He supported all the inner hashes. He had experience living in Germany, I think, with a family. So he was quite comfortable with international travel. He was quite comfortable socializing with non-Malaysians. He still lives down by Kuala Lumpur, I think in Petaling Jaya. But he's still an active Penang hasher because he goes up there often enough to do it. And this
Wow.
is 40 years later. And as soon as I see a Malaysian contingent at any inner hash, I go right over there and I almost always run into Mr. Cools.
That's great. All right, back to Long Beach then in fall of 85. How did this work? Somehow the Long Beach run had been running for 6 months by then, I think.
Yes.
So it was just some people you knew. How did you get to Long Beach and how'd you find out about it?
Okay, this was before the internet. So I came back, but some of the Australians that I had run with in Malaysia were coming to the US and they wanted to see Disneyland. And I lived half an hour from there. And I said, hell yes. And they said, and mom and dad would like to hash. So I said, okay. I did some calling around to my running friends and somehow it popped up and they said, you want to see a guy named Jerry Templeman. I called him up. Jerry Templeman's hash name is Eject. He was one of the founders of the hash earlier that year, along with Jock and Zapata. He just told me how to find the next run. It was down in Long Beach, and it was fantastic. They said, meet us at Shady Acres Miniature Golf Course. So I showed up there. It was closed, but they had a cafeteria that somebody knew somebody. So when we got done running, the cafeteria was open and we brought in pizzas and beer in their little restaurant. And I'm going, this is pretty cool. It's city hashing. I'm not running through the Malaysian jungles anymore, but the camaraderie was there. The songs were there. The hash names were there. I was happy to do that. Then a week or two later, my Australian friend showed up and I was able to take them hashing in America, which is what they wanted to do.
Yeah, great. Now you've traveled around. I know we've got a list of the hashes and some of the interesting spots in some of the countries. What about a decade later into the 90s, hashing in Iceland? What about the fire and ice hash?
Again, I was working with Hughes Aircraft Company and we're putting in a radar system up in the Keflavik Naval Air Station for NATO. I got the assignment. In the meantime, I had met and married Neva Ingersoll, who became Alouette at the Long Beach hash. And we got up there and we were running with the locals, but they didn't have a hash. And we found out the closest hash was in Dublin, which isn't all that far away from Reykjavik, Iceland, but it's still a little too far to go every week. So we were doing some runs on the base. And when we did one, this one little old lady came up to us and she goes, "Hi, my husband and I are hashers, and we were hoping you could start a hash up here. And oh, they're about to shoot the gun. Talk to me after the race." Boom. And so we met Methuselah and pushed through. Methuselah was the surgeon general on the base, and his wife, they were used to hashing. They'd hashed all over the world. That was in the wintertime. When spring started, we had already organized enough people that we started a hash as soon as it started to be summertime up there in March or so, and with their help, and called it Fire and Ice because that's a nickname up there of Iceland, because it's where two tectonic plates come together and they have active volcanoes there that sometimes erupt right through their glaciers. This fascinating place. I had to wear 2 or 3 extra layers than I had to in Penang. But
Yeah.
we really wanted to start a hash up there. The athletic director on the base was all for it. He'd been other places where they had hashes. And he goes, "There's a lot of guys up here that have nothing to do. And part of my job is to keep them active and healthy." And he goes, "Let's do it."
Yeah.
So we had a
Somewhat out
lot
of
of,
trouble.
yeah,
Tell me about that founding. How many people showed up at hash number 1 then in 1996 at Fire and Ice?
probably 30. I'm guessing right now. I can do some digging and come up with a lot better statistics, but enough of the people like Methuselah and Push Through knew a lot of people. The athletic director on the base, we called him, oh shit, I'll remember him too. But they knew a lot of people. And we also got the base TV station to run ads on TV, just saying, "Look, if you're not doing anything next Monday night, meet us at the gym. You don't even have to have a car. If you're up here without a car, we don't care. We'll have enough people and we'll drive you off the base. We're going to go hashing and we'll get you back to the base." There were a lot of guys that were single up there. They had a 2-year assignment. They were living in a dormitory. They would kill to get off the base. So it was pretty easy to recruit. We made sure we had T-shirts and stuff like that right from the get-go. We named guys as fast as we could get them and got them herring. We set up shirts. Your first hair, you got to the hair shirt. It had a bullseye on the back. It was easy to recruit a bunch. And we tried to do it every week initially to keep it going and build it. Then once it was clear that, like in wintertime, not everybody was going to make it every week, but we were able to do it long enough that I was able to notify the founders hash that yes, we do indeed have an active hash up here in Iceland, the first one we knew about. And Neva and I are hat number 13 members of the founders because of that.
Nice. Before we bump into it accidentally, where and how'd you get your hash name?
There weren't many Americans hashing in Penang. The last guy to hash in Penang, who I subsequently met down in the San Diego hash, his name was John Kennedy. So he promptly became the prez. My name is William, and the only William that these guys knew was Wild Bill. And I'm somewhat outgoing and subsequently earned the name as I went.
I want to hear a little bit more about Fire and Ice. Do you still have T-shirt from run number 1?
Yes.
All right. We always want to get memorabilia to the Hash Museum that's now in KO. And I know you don't want to give this stuff up. Maybe a photo or a copy or something. We need to get that. Have you sent that to Hazukashi's virtual T-shirt museum? Do you know about that?
No, I don't.
Okay, so we'll talk about that. I want to take a photo of that first hash shirt from the first run of a country. That'd be great to get. There's an online virtual T-shirt museum. And yeah, I was
Great.
talking about that. Okay.
We do have
Yeah.
a little story there. It's the shirt has a picture of Iceland on the front. It's got the usual stuff, but we have little blurbs saying, little voice arrows saying on and are you and stuff like that from all four corners of the hash of Iceland. Those where the radar stations are that we were putting in for the government. And we had to laugh because you say this is a classified T-shirt, but the tour books and everything say, yeah, and there's a radar dome up here and there's another one over here. But yeah, it's a classified hash shirt.
Okay. Now, what were the mismanagement? How formalized did you make that? Were you GM with Alouette together, or what kind of committee did you have there?
Yes, we were co-GMs and we got people on as quickly as possible. We had a religious advisor. A good example was trying to decide when was an auspicious day to run the first hash. We talked to our Icelandic buddies who were going to run with us because we did work with some of the Icelanders and said, when's a good time? We were thinking of, let's say, the 1st of April, first weekend in April. And they checked their runes and they said, no, that ain't going to work. You want a Viking hash, that's Easter Sunday. So we moved it back a week and did it the last weekend in March. And it was a benign day. It was really nice. It was a lot of fun. On Easter Sunday, we had one of the worst blizzards ever. We barely got off the base and ran. It took 4-wheel Jeeps to get us off the base to run number 2. But for the inaugural run, that would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we had our pagan religious advisors from then on. We had
for the day. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a songmeister. We had a complaint department. He was the biggest guy we had. His name was Buttercup. And we said, if you have concerns, take your issues to Buttercup and he'll settle them for you. Things like that. So we tried to involve as many people as quickly as possible.
You have a lot of exotic, more remote places on your list of where you've hashed. Galapagos. Make sure we talk about Antarctica. I just went on the second Wadawan hash cruise, and we hashed actually below the Arctic Circle, and a few times we did a Zodiac hash. But you hashed on Deception Island, and I think when we got there, that was the one blizzardy snowstorm day. How did you have a hash on Deception Island? Not that big.
It's not that big, and we wanted to do 2 teams on the boat. One sailed the boat. The other were the adventure guys that took us off on the Zodiacs off the boat to Deception Island and to all the places that we wanted to see. They took us to Deception Island, which is a volcano extinct. It's a caldera. We sailed in through the gap into the caldera, and I talked to the adventure guys and explained a little bit, and they go, we know all about hashing. We've been around the world. And I said, this would be my 7th continent. I'd really like to lay a hash there. We worked it out so it would be absolutely zero impact. What we did, we got the avalanche stakes that you use, and we just started at one end of the beach, and we hashed them up to another hole on the caldera that was reputedly the first place where human beings ever saw the continent of Antarctica through this gap.
The Devil's Hole? Maybe it's called Devil's Eye. Yeah.
Something like that. But we had
Neptune's Eye. Yeah.
Okay. We had a little beer check there, but it was basically to say that we did it. And then we turned around and went back to the start. And on the way back, we picked up the avalanche stakes that I had used to mark the trail. So when we came back, there was just no evidence at all that we'd ever even been there. And it was fantastic. Then we went back to the boat and did downs until nobody could see straight. It was just really super. And yeah, we made up a shirt for that one too.
Who was with you? How many hashers?
Let's see. There was me and Alouette. I don't know if there was anybody else other than the adventure tour guides. that were familiar with it. But again, we're with a bunch of runners. We were going down there to run the Antarctic Marathon on, I think it was King George Island. So we already had people that were adventurers, they were runners. It was easy to talk them into that. And then we said, yeah, when we get back to the boat, I'll buy the beer. So it was a slam dunk. Everybody was a hasher that day.
Yeah. Great. Let's talk about travel to big events. You went to your first interhash was Pattaya?
Yep. Yes.
And that's after you had already returned to Long Beach. So it was a bit of a trip. You weren't just hopping over from Malaysia. What do you remember about the first interhash?
For one thing, it was a slam dunk to get there because the Penang hash that I just left, they were sending a whole contingent. So that everybody was just going, you got to fly back here and we'll make all the arrangements. It was all taken care of. I just showed up and we just had nothing but fun. It was amazing. My biggest memory was Tim Magic Hughes riding in on a pink elephant to welcome everybody and go, we ain't in Kansas anymore. This is great.
And then you went to the next one. The first place that I know for sure we were together was your third interhash at Rotorua in New Zealand. But you went to a bunch there in the 90s.
Yeah. Alouette and I were really active in the hash, but we quickly liked the international crowds that we met at these interhashes, and you started seeing the same people showing up. And so it wasn't like going and having to meet everybody. You just showed up and it was old homely, starting with Mr. Cool, but then it moved around to the people that were pretty much interhash bums.
Yeah. Who are some of the people that you look forward to seeing there in the 80s and 90s? You recall anybody? Maybe it's not around anymore or you haven't seen for a while that were part of that time.
Tim Hughes, who was very big. I saw him at Rotorua. There was one night where the bars were staying open all night, and me and one of my Australian buddies from Newcastle, Music Man, who also came from Penang, and Music Man and I and Magic, the three of us, we stayed out all night, and I got in a lot of trouble for that.
Great.
It was those guys. There was a guy named Paulie. I'm trying to remember. This is back 30 years now.
Yeah, it is.
I recognized an awful lot of them. And Southern California had a big contingent that went a lot too. Although when Alouette and I got to places, we usually didn't hang out with the people that we hang out with all the time. We went and found our friends from England. There was a guy named Shep and GBH. Urine I knew from Cyprus. We would go look them up. Then when the hash founders hash started going to the interhashes, it made it pretty easy to link up with our old buddies there too.
That's great. That interhashing, traveling, finding people, you met one of the original founders of the hash from KL.
That was pretty unbelievable. His name was Horst Thompson. That was 88. We were on our way to to Bali, Indonesia, but the hash at KL was throwing a big party too because it was their 50th anniversary. So a huge contingent of us from Southern California were doing all of that. And Alouette and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And somebody said, that guy's Horst Thompson. He's one of the original hashers. So we went over and paid our respects, said hi to him, chatted with him a bit. And his address at that time was somewhere in the Philippines.
Literally.
He was one of those guys that just kind of went tropo. He went down there and I don't think he ever went home.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, you've been to the Salanger Club itself and the Long
Yep.
Bar. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So I want to jump over to international events at the continental level, the intra-Americas. You were at some of the early ones. What What was your impression of those? And if you were saying compare them or contrast them to World Interhashes, Philly, especially Philly, San Diego, those early ones.
Philly was our first one. There was an earlier one that was in '85, but we didn't go to that one. Wish we would have. But Alouette originally came from Philadelphia, so she said we're going to that one. And they set a very high bar because I think they had to know somebody in the city government. Because a good example was one of the runs we did. We went right through the Philadelphia Zoo after it was closed. You're running along, you're going up, and it's evening, and they swung the gates open, and we got to hash through the zoo. Then the first night, we finished on the rocky steps of the Museum of Fine Arts. That Rocky ran up and did his dance, and we had a police escort. We had police guards. They had an all-girl rock band at the top of the steps, so we did our downs there and ate and danced the night away. Over across the way of a skyline to the utilities building, the scroller up on top scrolled Philly welcomes Hash House Harriers, and he scrolled it all night while we were partying, and then we had shuttle buses back to the hotels. It was just awesome.
Let's see what you remember back closer to home in San Diego 2 years later. Speaking of police escorts, it's an infamous one. Were you there when the police helicopters and everything happened?
I do remember seeing one arrest at the Downs. Alouette and I also ran with the Orange County Hash all the time. And LA, Long Beach, and Orange County were instrumental in helping organize the thing as well. So we were active at all the hashes. We got done, I think it was the last hash, but it was up in Orange County, and we were partying, and everybody, they were giving out awards. And the girl that I think she won Miss Inter-America's Hash promptly popped off her bra and swung it around overhead on stage. The park was open to everybody at the time. And so this was no joke. Sheriffs came up and arrested her and took her down. But we did have a few hashers that were also in the government at the time, and they persuaded to let her loose. It was a little more regulated, I would say, than the hashes we were used to. We started at the Omni Hotel, and within the first couple hours, a bunch of us were in the jacuzzi, and they just came in and hit the off switch, and they said, the jacuzzi is closed for the duration of the weekend. And that was it. So we're going, okay, we're sorry, we'll behave. Anyway, it was like that. But San Diego was also a really good one. It was well organized and well run. Loved it.
Great. Hey, let's make sure we mention some of your other exotic stops. Easter Island in Chile.
Yeah, Easter Island was a good one. There was Marathon Tours organization was running a marathon there. So again, I was with a running group. We went down there, and Alouette had decided we had to lay a hash trail there, and we did. It was easily supported, but there were two things of interest. One is I didn't know if I was going to have any flour over there, so I bought a couple of kilos of flour on the mainland to fly over with me. And we're landing on the Easter Island airstrip, and it was in a small plane, and Alouette just says, wow, this is great. She goes, well, my husband has a couple of kilos of white powder. And, we said, we'll explain it later. Because I didn't get in any trouble for that. But we did lay trail, and not all of them statues are standing. Some of them are still laying down in the pastures and stuff like that. So we were laying trail, and actually, when we were scouting, I go, I can't believe this. We're going to be hashing by a bunch of moais. I said, where else in the world are you going to hash by some really old, dead famous things? And she goes, we've hashed in Hollywood.
Yeah. Let's talk about your moves into mismanagement, both you and Alouette. You were moving around, going off to Iceland and back. So you didn't get into mismanagement until when at Long Beach?
Alouette got involved very early. Tomorrow she'll be around to discuss it, but
Right.
she wanted to be involved. She really liked the hashing, so she wanted to be involved. That was easy to do because the GMs would rather just be GMs and let somebody else do the work. So she started organizing things. She worked in the background. She was the executive officer. She did it a lot. She decided we were going to have at least one activity a month that'd be an outstation run or a camp out or something like that. Anything that we could tailor the hashing. That included taking raft trips down the American River on a raft organization's tour, but we hashed and things like that. So we had something going every week. She made sure that the beer was cold, on and on and on. And she was also the historian. She started doing that, working with whoever was keeping the records right away. And she ended up becoming the hash historian. You've talked about the 40th annual book. She did the 20th. It took her a year to do it. And they used that as a springboard for our 40th.
The work she's done there is kind of legendary for anybody that's seen any of that or asked about some of the data. And yeah, and it's great. It's so great to hear when there's people that have passion for hashing and aren't worried about, they just want to run a circle. And that really keeps, of course, Long Beach, a long lasting hash with a high attendance. Is pretty much all through your years been that nearly triple figures a lot of times? Huh?
That's really true. They were really glad to see her back after she came back from Iceland after being away for a couple of years because nobody came to her standards. And plus, everybody loved her. She knew all the songs, and she was also an excellent runner. She did the Boston Marathon 5 times.
Right.
Yeah.
What about your step into being GM there at Long Beach? That's a big hash to take on.
It was. I became involved when I lost the election running for GM. Alouette and Async and I ran, and I was the third out of, and I only needed 2. So I became Hash Cash, which was a good thing for me because I learned how things went. And I also got to know everybody's name because I saw them every week. And that was really good for me. And I subsequently ran and won later on. And I was also their religious advisor and stuff like that, which is a fun thing to do because you have a very wide latitude of what you can do. In some ways, that was more fun than having all the responsibility of being the GM.
Yeah, just be funny. You were also not at the same time, but you got into mismanagement with Orange County, right?
Yeah, there were just a few guys that really wanted to do it. You were welcome to do it as long as you wanted. Then if you didn't want to, then we'd have an election. One guy ran for 17 years and he finally said, I want somebody else to do it. Yeah, but that was fine. I was running with Long Beach for so long. I said, I'm never going to say welcome to Long Beach. I'm never going to say
Right.
it. And I think it was the second run before I stepped down that I finally said, welcome to Long Beach. And boy, did I have to do down downs for that.
One thing also that's interesting with Long Beach, with all the data and Alouette spearheading that up and making sure that there's decades and decades of data and statistics and everything. You also have these a lot and events, ceremony, and award you have on your CB about when you had Trail of the Year. What's the deal with Trail of the Year? How big is it? Who picks it? And how is that presented, commemorable?
Every year when we have elections, that's one of the things on the ballot is which one did you think was Trail of the Year? It typically was a special event. It was an outstation run. One time we took a cruise through the Long Beach Harbor and stayed on the Queen Mary. It was usually something that had to be very special. Usually the run itself is pretty damn good. The first year we got it, it was up in Big Bear. We were running through trails. It was a camp out weekend. You're way away from the big city. And we had a real special beer check with a place that had a 360 view that was just killer. And nobody cared when they left. We were real proud of that trail, and it won Trail of the Year. Yeah.
What happens then? Is there something more than a line in a book when you win that?
Yeah. We've got one guy that when you get Trail of the Year, he gets some running shoes, makes a slash in them, and puts a beer mug in there, a plastic beer mug, and puts a lanyard around it. So you get a beer mug in a running shoe that you can hang around your neck and just pop the top and take a drink when you want to. And it's become a very desired item. His name's Achy Breaky Fart, and that's one of the things that he does for us. They give these awards out at our annual celebration where we announced who the new committee is, and everybody's waiting to see who gets Trail of the Year.
What are some of the other awards? Are any other
What
good
can I
ones?
say? Best legs, best buns, worst Trail of the Year, which gets usually a lot of competition, and biggest whiner, best write-up, because every run has a write-up that goes in our newsletter, and some are better than others. Yep.
Nice. You gave me a list of things, some of your other milestones and firsts and things. The Meridian Beer Check, was that a hash event? How'd that work?
Yes, it was. Let's see. Cardiff, Wales in 2004, we all went over to London and ran there as a prelude. One of the things they did on their hash run was they took us to Greenwich. We had a beer check at the Greenwich Observatory, and we thought that was great. And for people like us that have hashed around the world, that prime meridian is something to brag about.
Yeah.
And on that trip, we also went down to South London to find the Gisper family memorial. He died in the defense of Singapore. He was generally known as the founder of the founders. His body was never recovered after he was killed down there. But on the memorial, his name is recognized. And on the hash history book that Magic Hughes made up, there was a photo of it. So when we were in London, we went on a quest and found the cemetery and had a Guinness at the memorial in his honor.
All right. Let's talk then about some of your reflections, changes in the hash over the years. When you talked about 1984 Penang, it sounds like the hash we had 2 days ago in Toronto. It sounds like all the hashes are around. If we drop somebody back from today into Penang 40 years ago, they'd know exactly what was in store for them. It would be just the same. I'm not sure it works the other way. Take people who stopped hashing 40 years ago, and we plunk them down in some different places around the world. Hashing might look a little bit different or sound a little bit different. What do you think about the changing in the hash?
Of course, I'm old school. So is Alouette. We liked it the way we found it. And most of us old timers figure if you got the right 30 or 40 people there, you don't need the other 100. And and the logistics change a lot. Yeah. And when you come back to civilization where they have certain regulations about what you can and can't do, especially in a park or someplace where you've got that kind of freedom, most of the young ones, in our opinion, feel like it's just another party, and it's really not. And we try to say, try hashing, you might like it. What we always try to do, especially at Long Beach, is indoctrinate them. We start with in 1938, a bunch of hashers in Malaysia formed a hash. We start with the basic history and say, believe me, we can party with the best of them. And we do. We say we have a party once a week, but the focus is let's get the run done. We'll leave right at 10. When we say 10, we want to leave at 10. We'll keep it short. It's not a marathon. It's not competitive. But then when we get done, we expect you guys to shut up and listen to the downs. The more people you get, of course, the harder it is to do that and enjoy it. So those are some of the changes. Some of the other changes, we used to really like to give out names and stuff like that fit the person, that it was witty. It could be a little obscene, but it had to fit the person. And a lot of times they wouldn't name them until they earned something. Okay. What we've seen over the last 10, 20 years is the more obscene you can get it, the better. If you could get a quick laugh when you're naming them, that's better than, you know what? We lose a lot of people like that. You give somebody a stupid, disgusting name that they can't even tell to their mother, they're likely to not come back. We've just seen that, but again, it's the old school being critical of any changes. Like our founder, Jock, said, he goes, I never intended it to be this way, but it's like a kid. It grew up on its own and it's going to do its own thing. And they just, yeah, that's what the founder said, and I'm good with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Bringing the history in certainly is a part that helps people feel like they're part of a tribe or the group or the community. And that, yeah, it's not uncommon for a lot of people to agree with that the names sometimes are exactly anti-culture because they're like, I don't want to be part of something that does that. Yeah, it's all fair stuff. You're pretty gentle on this. I can tell. Obviously, you love the hash. You've been doing it for, it's most of your life, isn't it?
Yes.
40 years is more than, okay, good for you. And I started just a little bit after you did. And what about injuries and your worst day of hashing? As a runner, you're training, you probably had some running injuries. Did anything happen to you on trail?
I do know that Long Beach has attorneys and they have disclaimers and stuff like that. And they basically said it's hardly worth the paper it's printed on. So most of the time, our disclaimers, I can hurt myself if I want to. On one early run in Long Beach, I also got an alternate name of Cactus Bill. We're over on Catalina Island and Alouette had set trail, but she set a faults that went down a real steep fire break, and I missed the faults part of that. And I went tumbling through a stand of beaver tail cactus, and I was covered with cactus when I got down. So I got the nickname Cactus Bill, and a lot of people just called me that.
Nice.
That was one of the most memorable injury for me, for sure.
It's great. So what about hash traveling now? Are you still planning trips that are around hashing events?
I got to say, COVID kind of kicked that one in the teeth. We had signed up to go to Trinidad, Tobago in 2000, and then they delayed that a year. Then they delayed it 2 years. Then they canceled it. And I think the next one was down in New Zealand, and we'd been there. It sounded like more trouble than it was worth to go to a place we'd already been. And it certainly wouldn't have been the same as the original New Zealand trip. So we don't look as actively for that anymore. We're now in our mid 70s. But if we go someplace, we'll lay a trail. Yeah.
Tomorrow we'll have Alouette join, and she won't know everything you've said about hashing and about her, but we'll pick it up there and continue. How's that?
That sounds wonderful.
Wild Bill, on to part 2.
On, buddy. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
To close the circle, here's the Hash Anthem sung by Mother Hash.
Swing